The first thing Emily noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind. No, this was the heavy, wrong kind of silence that happens when a man who is used to being surrounded by people suddenly has no one left in the room but his own pain. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the small-town street into a mirror of trembling yellow lights. Emily had locked the cafe door 10 minutes ago. The chairs were upside down. The espresso machine had cooled. Her hand still smelled like cinnamon and soap. She was reaching for her bag when she heard it. One slow knock. Not urgent, not dramatic. Almost hesitant. Emily froze. No one knocked like that unless they didn't want to be seen. She turned, walked to the glass, and that's when the world tilted. Carter Hale stood outside like he didn't belong to the night. His coat was expensive. Too expensive for this street. His watch caught the light the way jewelry does in movies. But his face looked nothing like the man she remembered. He wasn't smug. He wasn't untouchable. He was pale, jaw tight, breathing shallow like every breath was a negotiation with pain. One of his hands was pressed against the door frame to stay upright. The other hovered near his side as if moving it hurt too much to admit. And his eyes, those eyes that had once looked through her like she was air, were now looking at her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. Emily's throat went dry. She hadn't said his name out loud in months, but it rose inside her anyway, sharp and unwanted. Carter. The same Carter who had once stood in a room full of champagne and glittering laughter and made her feel small without even raising his voice. The same Carter who had looked at her simple dress, her simple hands, her simple life, and made a decision she never forgot. You don't fit. You're not for my world. Emily didn't open the door. Not right away. Because this was the kind of moment life played as a cruel joke, bringing back the one person she had worked so hard to stop missing. Carter swallowed, and it looked like it hurt. He leaned closer to the glass, rain clinging to his hair, to his lashes, to the sharp lines of his face. Up close, Emily saw it. His right arm held stiff, unnatural, his shoulder slightly lowered, his posture carefully controlled like he was guarding something fragile and broken inside him. Not weakness, injury. But even then, he still carried himself like a man who had never been told no. Emily's hand tightened around the lock. "What are you doing here?" she asked through the glass, her voice calm, in the way women learn to be calm when their hearts are screaming. Carter's mouth opened, then closed, like he had rehearsed 100 sentences and none of them survived the reality of her standing there. Finally he spoke. And his voice, low, strained, did something dangerous to the air between them. I didn't know where else to go. Emily's heart thudded once, hard. Because Carter Hale always knew where to go. He had people, drivers, assistants, security, doctors that came to him. Homes in cities Emily had only seen on postcards. A life built to ensure he never had to need anyone. So why was he here? On her street? At her door? In the rain? Looking like a man who'd been forced to learn the difference between power and helplessness. Emily should have walked away. She should have told him to call his world, his perfect polished world, and let it take care of him the way it always had. But then Carter's gaze dropped, just for a second, and Emily saw it. Something he'd never shown before. Fear. Not fear of pain. Fear of being alone with it. "I just need," he started, then winced slightly like even the words pulled at a place inside him that wasn't healed. His pride fought the rest of him, and for a moment Emily thought he'd turn away, choose dignity over need, the way men like Carter always did. But he didn't. He lifted his eyes back to hers, and said the words that rearranged everything. "I just need you to open the door." Emily stared at him, stunned by how simple the request was, how terrifyingly human. And the cruelest part? Emily realized she could still feel something. Even after everything. Even after the way he had made her too simple sound like a flaw. Her fingers trembled near the lock, not because she was weak, but because she knew. If she opened that door, she wasn't just letting him in. She was letting life test the strongest boundary she had ever built, and she still didn't know the truth. She still didn't know what happened to Carter. She didn't know about the accident. She didn't know that the man who once believed he owned the world had woken up in a hospital bed, unable to do the most basic things without help. She didn't know that for the first time in his life, money couldn't buy what he needed most. Not a doctor, not a driver, not another solution, just someone who stayed. Emily inhaled slowly, eyes locked with his. And then, with a steady hand that didn't match the storm in her chest, she turned the key. The lock clicked, and Carter stepped inside. Not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had finally met the one thing his world couldn't protect him from. The order of what truly mattered. If you've ever been told you were too simple to be chosen, stay with me, because what happens next will heal something in you. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe now in the Chanel. Carter's shoes left a thin trail of water on the cafe floor. Emily didn't comment. She didn't stare. She didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to hear. She simply grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and placed it on the nearest chair, quietly, the way she did everything. "Sit," she said, not as an order, but as a boundary. Carter hesitated. It was such a small moment, so small most people wouldn't notice it, but Emily did. Because Carter Hale wasn't the kind of man who sat because someone like her told him to. Still, he lowered himself carefully, jaw tight, breath shallow. The movement clearly pulled at his shoulder and down his arm, and for a second his face betrayed him, pain flashing through the cracks of his control. Emily's hand stayed steady as she poured him water. She slid the glass across the counter like it was the most normal thing in the world. But inside she was shaking, because all she could see was the last time she'd been this close to him, the last time his world had swallowed her whole, and the way he had made her feel. Too small to matter. The memory hit her without permission, like a door slamming open in her mind. Emily accepted the last-minute gala shift for one reason: rent. She told herself it would be easy money, nothing personal, nothing deep. A few hours carrying trays through a world that didn't know her name. Then back to her quiet apartment, her simple dinner, her real life. She pinned her hair neatly and wore her best dress. Plain, clean, honest. Not because she lacked taste, but because she refused to perform. She had learned peace was louder than sparkle. The ballroom looked like a magazine page that never had fingerprints. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across champagne flutes like tiny stars. Men in tailored suits laughed too loudly, as if silence could expose them. Women in designer dresses moved like they owned the air. Emily stepped in with a tray and instantly became invisible. Invisible was safe, she reminded herself. Invisible meant untouched. Until that night decided she would be seen. The music was soft, but the room pulsed with strategy. Every smile was a transaction, every handshake a silent negotiation. Emily weaved between bodies with practiced grace and lowered eyes. She did not envy them, she simply didn't belong to them. Still, something in her wondered what it felt like to be chosen there. To be looked at with pride instead of tolerance. That thought was small, and she tried to kill it quickly. She noticed him before she knew his name. A man near the stage who didn't lean into the crowd, he commanded it. People shifted subtly to make space, like the floor recognized him. His suit was black and perfect, his posture calm, his face unreadable. He wasn't loud. He didn't have to be. Power sat on him like a second skin. Someone whispered, "That's Carter Hale." Emily's fingers tightened around the tray. She had heard that name before, the way people said it with reverence. A founder, a headline, a man who built empires and never apologized. She told herself it didn't matter who he was. He was just another guest and she was just another worker. But her heartbeat betrayed her professionalism, because something about him felt like a storm held back by glass. The crowd thickened as the host called for a toast. Waitstaff moved like shadows, slipping through narrow gaps. Emily turned at the wrong time, shoulder brushed by someone careless. A laugh behind her, too close, too sharp. The tray tilted and the champagne obeyed gravity without mercy. Gold spilled in a clean, cruel arc, and it landed on Carter Hale's chest like a verdict. The room paused, just enough for Emily to feel it. Not concern for her, but fascination with what would happen next. She grabbed napkins with hands that suddenly felt too small. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice steady by sheer force. "I'll pay for the cleaning, Carter looked down at his suit as if he'd been offended by the concept. Then he raised his eyes to her, and the air cooled. He wasn't shouting, which somehow made it worse. His gaze moved over her, dress, shoes, hands, like a silent inventory. Not lust, not curiosity, just assessment. Emily felt herself reduced to numbers she didn't know she carried. Then Carter's mouth curved slightly, polite enough to fool strangers. "Don't worry," he said, smooth as glass. "But be careful. People like me don't have time for simple mistakes. People like me." The words weren't loud, but they were sharp enough to draw blood. Emily's face warmed, and she hated herself for feeling anything at all. A few men chuckled like he'd delivered something clever. A few women smiled like she deserved the lesson. Emily swallowed hard and nodded once, professional to the bone. "I understand," she said, even though she shouldn't have. A woman in a silver dress slid in beside him like a final punctuation. She hooked her arm through Carter's with effortless ownership. Her perfume was expensive and aggressive, like a warning. She looked at Emily as if Emily were part of the decor. "Carter," she said softly, "don't waste your breath." Then to Emily, not even a full sentence, just a glance of dismissal. Emily stepped back as if the floor had shifted under her feet. She turned away before her eyes could betray her. She balanced the tray again, shoulders straight, chin level. In a room like this, tears were entertainment. She refused to offer them. She moved into the crowd and became invisible on purpose. But invisibility didn't erase the sting in her chest. It only taught it to burn quietly. Later, behind the venue, cold air slapped her cheeks awake. Emily stood near a dumpster under a buzzing light that flickered. She scrubbed her hands like the humiliation had a texture. She told herself it was nothing, just a man with a big ego. She told herself she had survived worse than one rich man's cruelty. Yet her stomach twisted with the part she couldn't confess. For half a second, she had wanted him to look at her differently. She went back inside and finished the shift without breaking. She poured drinks, smiled politely, walked carefully, stayed silent. No one apologized and no one asked if she was okay. That was the rule of worlds like Carter's. The staff absorbs everything. When the night finally ended, she counted the tips with numb fingers. Money was money, and she needed it. But it didn't feel like victory, it felt like endurance. On the train home, the city lights blurred like tired eyes. Emily stared at her reflection in the dark window. She looked ordinary, and she liked that about herself. Ordinary meant dependable, honest, real. Still, Carter's phrase replayed with sick precision. Too simple for his time. Too simple for his world. She clenched her jaw and promised herself, never again. Days passed, and Emily kept her promise by building distance. She didn't search his name, didn't follow the headlines, didn't ask. When customers mentioned Carter Hale, she pretended she hadn't heard. She rebuilt her peace like a wall made of small choices. Wake early, work hard, laugh with people who meant it. No fantasies, no curiosity, no soft spot for men like him. Then one afternoon, a sleek black car appeared outside her cafe. Carter walked in as if he belonged everywhere, even there. Not wearing the gala suit this time, but still sharp, still untouchable. The cafe felt quiet in the way quiet happens when money enters. Emily didn't rush. She wiped the counter and kept her face neutral. Carter's eyes tracked her, unreadable but focused. "I owe you," he said. Like the words cost him. Emily met his gaze and answered, "No, you don't." Carter's jaw tightened. Pride meeting a boundary it couldn't buy. He offered compensation, a check, a solution that sounded like control. Emily pushed it back without touching it as if it were contaminated. "I'm not a mistake you clean up," she said, voice calm, lethal. For the first time, Carter looked unsettled. Not angry, just unfamiliar with someone who didn't bend. And that was the moment Emily realized he was dangerous in a new way. She asked him to leave, and he did. Slowly, as if resisting. At the door, he paused like he wanted to say something human. But his world had trained him to speak in outcomes. not feelings. So he left her with nothing but silence and a lingering presence. Emily watched the black car disappear, heart steady, hands trembling. She didn't know that life was already moving pieces behind the curtain. And soon, Carter Hale would return, needing what money couldn't deliver. Emily tried to forget the way Carter's eyes had followed her. Not because she wanted him to, but because it felt like danger. Men like him didn't look at women like her for long. They looked, decided, and moved on to something shinier. So she went back to routine. Early mornings, steady work, quiet prayers. She poured coffee, smiled at regulars, paid bills without complaining. And she treated that brief collision with his world like a bruise, unspoken. But Carter didn't treat it like a bruise. He treated it like a problem. In his mind, problems had solutions. A number, a check, a call made. He told himself he was fixing an inconvenience, restoring order. Yet the memory kept returning. Not the spill, but her stillness afterward. She hadn't begged. She hadn't cried. She hadn't performed pain. She had simply looked at him like he was not a god. And that unsettled something he couldn't name. A week after the gala, Emily's manager called her to the office. His voice was too cheerful, his smile too forced. "Someone left something for you," he said, sliding a small envelope forward. Inside was a card, thick, elegant, the kind meant to be kept. No apology, no warmth, just a line that looked like a verdict. For the inconvenience. C. Hale. And tucked behind it, a check that made Emily's stomach turn. The amount was more than Emily earned in a month. Maybe 2, maybe 3, depending on tips and overtime. For a second, her hands trembled, not from greed but from insult. Because it wasn't payment for cleaning. It was payment for silence. A way of saying, you were small enough to erase with money. Emily stared at the check like it was a trap disguised as kindness. Then she folded it, stood, and walked straight back to the front. That same afternoon, a black car pulled up outside the cafe. Not the kind that belonged to the neighborhood, not even close. 2 men stepped out, security, discreet but unmistakable. Customers slowed their conversations, eyes widening in quiet curiosity. And then Carter entered like he carried his own weather. Perfect coat, calm posture, that expensive air of inevitability. Emily didn't rush. She kept wiping the counter until it was already clean. Carter's gaze swept the room once, assessing it like real estate. Then it settled on Emily, sharper than it had been at the gala. He approached the counter and the cafe felt suddenly too small. "I sent something," he said. "You didn't cash it." Emily placed the check on the counter like she was returning lost keys. "I'm not cashing it," she replied, voice steady. Carter's jaw tightened as if refusal was a language he didn't speak. "It's not charity," he said too quickly. "It's handling what happened." Emily met his eyes and didn't flinch. "What happened," she said, "was you embarrassed me." Carter blinked once as if the sentence had slapped him. He wasn't used to consequences that had names. He was used to consequences that had invoices. "I didn't embarrass you," he answered, controlled. "You spilled champagne on me in a room full of people." Emily exhaled slowly, refusing the bait of that logic. "And you chose to remind me that you believe you're above me," she said. Carter's expression hardened, but there was something beneath it. Unease. Because deep down he knew he had enjoyed that moment. And he wasn't sure why that knowledge tasted bitter now. Carter leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice like he owned privacy. "I said one sentence," he murmured. "You're making it bigger than it is." Emily's mouth curved, not in humor, but in clarity. "That's what powerful people say when they want to stay powerful," she replied. Behind Carter, his security shifted, uncomfortable. In Carter's world, women didn't answer back like that. Not unless they were protected by status. Emily pushed the check toward him again. "I don't want this," she said. "And I don't want your apology if it's money." Carter stared at the paper like it had betrayed him. Then he did what men like him always did. He changed the offer. "Then let me take you to dinner," he said. "One dinner." Emily didn't laugh. She didn't blush. She simply looked at him like she was weighing truth, not temptation. "Why?" she asked. The question landed like a stone thrown into still water. Carter's lips parted, then closed again. He had prepared lines. He always prepared lines. But something about Emily made lines feel cheap. So he chose the safest answer, one that kept him in control. "Because I don't like unfinished things," he said. Emily nodded slowly, as if she had expected exactly that. "I'm not a thing," she replied. The words weren't loud, but they shut the room down. Carter's eyes narrowed, and for the first time irritation rose. He wasn't used to a woman refusing him without playing hard to get. This didn't feel like a game. It felt like a wall, and Carter had never respected walls. He had always purchased doors. He tried again, softer, polished. "You're overreacting," he said. "I'm trying to make it right." Emily's hands rested calmly on the counter, steady as a promise. "Making it right would be acknowledging what you did," she answered, not trying to turn it into a date. Carter inhaled, visibly restraining something. Pride, annoyance, surprise. And in that restraint, Emily saw the truth. He didn't know how to be human here. A woman entered the cafe just then. Styled hair, expensive heels, perfume. She looked Carter up and down with familiarity and satisfaction. "Carter," she said, warm in a way that sounded practiced. Then her gaze slid to Emily. Quick, dismissive, sharp. "So this is the place," she added, like Emily's life was an odd hobby. Carter didn't correct her. He didn't introduce Emily. And that small silence felt louder than the gala ever had. Emily's chest tightened, not from jealousy but from confirmation. This was his world returning to claim him. Emily stepped back and picked up a clean cup, giving her hands a task. "I think we're done," she said quietly. Carter turned toward the woman as if pulled by habit. Then back to Emily, and for a second something flickered. Conflict. But habit won. "Emily," Carter said, tasting her name like he wasn't sure he deserved it. She looked up, and her eyes were calm enough to break a man. "I'm not available," she answered. "Not for your guilt, not for your curiosity." Carter's face tightened. "You don't know me," he said. Emily nodded. "I know what you chose to show me." And then, with a gentleness that somehow made it harsher, she added, "Please leave." The woman's smile widened as if she'd won something invisible. Carter hesitated, one heartbeat too long. He wanted to say more, but pride held his tongue like a leash. He took the check, folded it, and slid it into his pocket. "Fine," he said, voice clipped. "Have it your way." He turned and walked out as if he was the one rejecting her. But Emily saw the truth. He was retreating, not victorious. When the black car disappeared down the street, the cafe exhaled again. Emily's co-worker stared at her like she'd done something heroic. But Emily didn't feel heroic. She felt tired, because holding a boundary always costs more than people admit. She cleaned the counter again, not because it needed it, because she did. She told herself he wouldn't return. Men like Carter didn't come back twice. And somewhere across the city, Carter sat in the back seat realizing one thing. For the first time, money hadn't worked. And that made him want Emily more. Carter told himself Emily was an exception he could correct. Not because he cared. At least that's what he repeated to himself. He had been refused before, but never by someone with nothing to gain. In his world, resistance was usually a negotiation in disguise. Emily's refusal felt final, clean, almost principled. And that irritated him more than any insult could have, because it suggested his power had limits. The next morning, Carter's assistant placed the schedule on his desk. Back-to-back meetings, a board presentation, a charity photo op. Everything perfectly arranged to keep him moving, unbothered, untouchable. He stared at the calendar and felt something unfamiliar. Restlessness. He had the best doctors, the best trainers, the best chefs, the best suits. Yet one woman in a plain cafe had made him feel exposed. So he did what he always did when he felt exposed. He worked harder. By noon, his office was filled with men who spoke in numbers. Acquisitions, market share, negotiations that moved like chess pieces. Carter's voice stayed calm, confident, precise. He closed deals with a pen that never trembled. But every time the room went quiet, his mind returned to one sentence: "I'm not a thing." He hated that it had sounded like truth. That evening, he attended a private dinner with donors and executives. Crystal glasses, polished laughter, compliments designed to flatter him. The woman in silver from the cafe sat beside him, smiling like victory. She touched his arm casually, as if claiming her place before anyone asked. Carter let it happen, not because he wanted her, because it was easier. Easier than admitting a woman like Emily had unsettled him. Easier than confronting the emptiness behind all this shine. "She's cute," one of his friends said, swirling a drink. "The cafe girl. But you don't actually do that, right?" The table laughed softly. Safe laughter. Approval laughter. Carter's mouth curved automatically, the expression he wore like armor. "She's not my type," he said too quickly. Then, to seal it, he added with a careless shrug, "Too simple." The word landed with a satisfaction he didn't deserve. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, the silence felt hostile. He poured himself a drink and didn't taste it. He walked to the window and watched the city lights glitter like promises. For years, he had believed this view was proof of a life well lived. Yet all it showed him now was distance. Thousands of people below, and not one he trusted enough to call. He told himself that was strength. The next week, Carter made an appearance at a hospital fundraiser. Not because he needed attention, because his brand required it. He shook hands, smiled for cameras, delivered the right speeches. People praised him. Visionary, disciplined, generous, unstoppable. He accepted the compliments like he'd earned them. And still, the only praise that mattered now was the one he'd never get: Emily's respect. He drove past her cafe once without stopping. He told himself it was coincidence, just the fastest route. But his eyes tracked the windows, looking for a glimpse of her. When he didn't see her, he felt an irrational disappointment. He tried to erase it by speeding up and turning the music louder. Yet the absence stayed, heavy in his chest, like the city had suddenly lost one important color. Carter's world responded to discomfort the same way it always did. His assistant booked a weekend trip, reset, luxury, distraction, a private club event, a charity golf tournament, a dinner with investors. The silver dress woman appeared again, perfectly timed, perfectly polished. She laughed at his jokes before he finished them. She spoke about their future in a tone that assumed agreement. Carter let her because agreement was easier than honesty. But inside, something began to fracture. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a thin crack spreading through certainty. He found himself watching people differently, how they smiled, why they stayed. He noticed how quickly they changed tone when he entered a room, how they praised him even when he said nothing of value. He realized he didn't know what it felt like to be loved without leverage, and he hated that Emily might. One afternoon, during a high-stakes meeting, Carter's phone buzzed. He never allowed interruptions. Everyone knew that rule. But something on the screen made his eyes narrow. A short message from an unknown number. No greeting, no apology. Just a photo of a check. And beneath it, Emily's handwriting. "I didn't cash it. I won't. Please stop." Carter's jaw tightened, and the room felt smaller. He ended the meeting early for the first time in years. His partner stared like he'd spoken another language. Carter walked out, anger rising, not at Emily, but at what she represented. A boundary he couldn't cross with money, a dignity he couldn't buy. He told himself she was being dramatic, stubborn, ungrateful. But deep down, he knew the real accusation was silent. She didn't need him. That night, Carter drove alone, no driver, no security. He wanted control, and driving was control. The roads were wet, the sky low and heavy, the city restless. He told himself he needed air, speed, movement. He told himself he was fine. He always told himself he was fine. His phone buzzed again. His assistant warning about a late call from the board. Carter ignored it, pressing the gas harder. The intersection appeared too fast. A green light that flickered. A car that hesitated. A mistake that wasn't his. Headlights cut across his windshield like a blade. Carter's hands tightened on the wheel, instinct sharp. He swerved, avoiding the direct impact by inches. But the world still hit him. Metal, glass, force, a violent sideways slam, and then a sound like silence breaking. When Carter opened his eyes, everything was wrong. The car was tilted, air thick with the smell of smoke and rain. His vision blurred, then sharpened on a single horrifying truth. His right arm wouldn't lift. His shoulders screamed with every breath. He tried to move, and pain pinned him like a warning. For the first time, he couldn't command his body to obey. And the fear that rose in him had no name, only heat. Sirens arrived, voices shouting, hands pulling him out carefully. Carter fought them at first, embarrassed by weakness, furious at dependence. But he couldn't argue with bone and tendon and shock. In the ambulance, bright lights stabbed his eyes, and the world spun. A paramedic asked him questions, and Carter answered mechanically. "What's your emergency contact?" the voice demanded. Carter opened his mouth, and nothing came out. In the hospital, doctors spoke with professional calm. Surgery was likely. The injury would take time. He'd regain function, but not instantly. Not with money, not with ego. He would need physical therapy, assistance, patience, things he'd never practiced. His assistant arrived, frantic, already organizing a plan. But when the nurse asked who would stay overnight, the room went quiet, and Carter realized his wealth could purchase help, but not presence. Hours later, when the pain medication thinned his defenses, he saw her. Not physically, only in memory, bright and stubborn as a candle. Emily behind that counter, eyes calm, hands steady, saying, "I'm not a thing." He remembered the way her voice hadn't begged, hadn't chased, hadn't pleaded. He remembered the way she had told him to leave, and how he had. Now he lay helpless, arm immobilized, dignity bruised, surrounded by strangers. And for the first time in his life, Carter wanted one thing that money couldn't buy. Someone who stayed because they chose to. Carter woke to a room that smelled like disinfectant and control. Monitors hummed softly, nurses moved with trained efficiency. His right arm was immobilized, shoulder-wrapped, pain measured in pulses. The surgeon's words echoed like a sentence. Recovery would take time, not ruin, not poverty, just dependence, the one thing Carter feared. His phone lit up with messages, board updates, investor reassurances, headlines. Everything in his empire kept moving, as if he were replaceable. That should have comforted him. Instead, it hollowed him out. His assistant arranged private care, top therapists, a home nurse. Security stood outside his door like a reminder of who he was. Yet when the nurses asked simple questions, who will help you bathe, eat, sleep, Carter realized money could hire hands, but not tenderness. He watched strangers adjust his pillow and felt a quiet humiliation. He had built a kingdom, and still, he had no one who stayed for him. When he was discharged, the hospital exit looked like a stage. A driver opened the car door. Paparazzi shouted his name. Flashes erupted. Carter forced a composed expression, the one the world expected. Inside the car, pain crawled down his shoulder like fire under skin. He stared at the city passing by and felt oddly distant from it. All those buildings, all that power, yet he couldn't lift a glass without help. Control, he realized, was a costume that could tear in one night. His penthouse greeted him with silence polished to perfection. Everything was expensive, minimal, untouched, like a museum of his life. The home nurse arrived with cheerful professionalism and strict instructions. Medication at 8, ice every 2 hours, no sudden movements. Carter nodded, annoyed by how childlike he felt. When he tried to button his shirt with one hand, his fingers fumbled. He stared at the stubborn buttons, jaw tight, and hated himself. Over the next days, Carter learned new humiliations. He couldn't drive, couldn't tie a tie, couldn't cut his own steak cleanly. He could sign contracts with his left hand, but even that felt wrong. He could make calls, give orders, control outcomes, yet his body refused him. The therapist spoke about patience as if it were a skill you practiced. Carter had never practiced patience, he had outsourced it. Now it sat in front of him, unavoidable, like a mirror. His circle came as expected. Brief visits with expensive sympathy. They brought flowers that looked like decor, not comfort. They asked about his recovery the way they asked about the market. A few mentioned the silver dress woman as if she were the natural next step. "She'll be good for optics," someone joked. And the room laughed. Carter laughed too, out of habit, and then felt sick. Because the joke was true. His world loved him for what he represented. After they left, Carter sat alone in the dark living room. The city glittered outside, but the light didn't reach him. He remembered the ambulance question. "Who's your emergency contact?" He had said his assistant's name, and the shame still burned. Not because it was wrong, because it was revealing. He had built everything except a real place to be weak. And weakness had arrived anyway. On the fourth night, pain kept him awake. He tried to sleep, but his shoulder throbbed, and his thoughts were louder. He scrolled through news updates with his left hand, numb to the praise. Then he found her cafe's page by accident, or so he told himself. A photo, cinnamon rolls, warm lights, a quote about kindness. He stared at the image too long, heart tightening inexplicably. Emily's world looked real in a way his never had. The next morning, his therapist asked, "Who do you trust?" Carter almost laughed. Trust was a contract, wasn't it? But when he tried to name someone, he couldn't. He thought of the men who praised him, the women who smiled for him. He pictured their faces if he needed them at 2 a.m. in pain. He knew they would send someone else to handle it. Then his mind returned, unwillingly, to Emily. He resisted it for 2 days, because going to Emily would mean admitting she had been right. That his world was built on appearance, not presence. That his power couldn't protect him from loneliness. Still, the craving grew. Not romantic at first, just human. He wanted one person who wouldn't flatter him. One person who would look at him and tell the truth. Carter's assistant offered options like a menu. "We can arrange a rehab retreat, private chef, concierge therapy." Carter listened, then surprised even himself. "No," he said. His voice sounded rough, unfamiliar. His assistant blinked. "Sir?" Carter swallowed, pain and pride fighting in his throat. "I need something else." That afternoon, against every protocol, he asked to be driven alone. No entourage, no cameras, no silver dress woman. Just him, a driver, and the humiliation of his own decision. The car traveled away from glass towers into quieter streets. Carter watched the city change, noticing things he'd never bothered to see. Stores with hand-painted signs, people laughing without strategy. And then the cafe appeared, warm in the gray afternoon like a promise. Carter sat in the back seat, hand braced against his injured side. His shoulder ached with every bump in the road. He told himself he would say one sentence, a clean apology, then leave. But as soon as he saw Emily through the window, he forgot every plan. She stood behind the counter, focused, calm, hair pinned back, not performing, not chasing attention, just existing with quiet strength. And Carter felt something inside him break open. He stepped out of the car slowly, careful with his arm. The driver offered to help, and Carter refused automatically. He wanted one last illusion of independence. He crossed the sidewalk, shoes wet from melting slush, breath visible. His security had insisted on distance, but Carter waved them back. For the first time, he didn't want protection. He wanted exposure, because he deserved it. When he reached the door, he hesitated. Not because he feared rejection. He had survived rejection in business. He feared something worse. Being seen as he truly was. A man who could buy anything except what he needed most. He raised his hand and knocked, slow and measured. Not demanding, not entitled. Almost asking permission to exist there. And that was the first honest thing he'd done in months. Emily looked up and her eyes narrowed instantly. Not hatred, recognition, sharpened by pain that had learned boundaries. She walked to the door but didn't open it right away. Carter could see her reflection in the glass, steady as a verdict. He lifted his gaze to meet hers, refusing to hide behind charm. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. And for once the words were not strategy. They were surrender. Emily's voice came through the glass, calm and controlled. "Why are you here, Carter?" she asked, and his name sounded like a warning. He swallowed, feeling pride fight the truth in his throat. My arm, he admitted. I can't do everything right now. Emily didn't soften. You have a whole team, she replied. I have help, Carter said, but I don't have... He stopped himself, trembling. He couldn't say you without sounding like a thief. A long silence stretched between them. Emily's hand hovered near the lock, and Carter felt his heartbeat stumble. He expected anger, a slammed door, the justice he deserved. Instead, Emily inhaled slowly, eyes locked with his like a final test. If I open this door, she said, it won't be because you're Carter Hale. He nodded once, throat tight, accepting the terms he couldn't control. Then the lock clicked. Soft, final. And Carter stepped inside, not as a king, but as a man about to learn the true order of what matters. Emily didn't welcome Carter with softness. She welcomed him with rules. She didn't offer tea like a peace treaty or sympathy like surrender. She pointed to a chair near the counter and said, "Sit." Carefully, Carter obeyed, jaw tight, as if following her words cost him something. The cafe was quiet. Afternoon slow, only the hum of the fridge behind them. Emily locked the door, flipped the sign, and turned back to face him fully. You're here, she said, but you don't get to bring your world in with you. Carter's eyes flicked to the windows, to the street, to the emptiness. His instincts searched for security, for exits, for control. Emily noticed and didn't comment, which somehow felt like mercy. She grabbed a small first aid kit and moved toward him with calm precision. Let me see, she said, gesturing to his sling and bandages. Carter hesitated, pride flaring, then slowly allowed her closer. The scent of coffee and cinnamon made him feel strangely exposed. Emily's fingers were gentle, but her expression stayed firm. She didn't gasp, didn't dramatize the bruising, didn't pity him. She simply adjusted what was slipping and checked the tightness of the wrap. Carter watched her hands, the same hands he once judged as simple. Now he realized they were trained by life. Steady, capable, unafraid. I have a nurse, he said, needing to defend himself. Emily didn't look up. Then why are you here? The question hit him in a place painkillers couldn't numb. Carter swallowed, eyes lowering for a brief second. I needed quiet, he said. I needed something that wasn't fake. Emily stepped back and folded her arms. Quiet isn't what you came for, she replied. Quiet is what you ran from. Carter's mouth tightened. He hated that she sounded right, and he hated even more that he didn't have the authority to argue. Emily pulled a small stool closer to him and sat, not too near. She kept distance the way wise women did, close enough to help, far enough to stay safe. Here's how this works, she said, voice even. No press. No assistants coming in and out. No paying me for this. Carter's brows knit. I'm not asking you to work for free. Emily's gaze sharpened. You're not asking. You're used to assuming. Silence swallowed the space between them. Carter tried to regain footing with a calm tone. Name a number, he said. I'll make sure you're compensated properly. Emily exhaled, slow, almost tired. You still don't get it, she said. Carter's jaw tightened again, irritation rising like instinct. I'm trying to be fair, he insisted. People don't just... Emily cut him off. People do when they have a heart. The words landed harder than an insult, because Carter had always believed heart was optional. He had admired kindness from a distance, like art on a wall, but he had never lived inside it, never depended on it. Emily stood and walked behind the counter, giving herself space. If I help you, she said, it's not for money, it's for truth. Carter stared at her, unsettled by how expensive truth suddenly felt. She set a glass of water in front of him, then a small plate of food. Nothing fancy, warm soup, bread, simple comfort. Carter looked at it as if it belonged to someone else. He hadn't eaten like this in years, not without staff, not without presentation. Emily watched him carefully. You need to eat with your left hand, she said. Carter's lips pressed together. I can manage. Emily nodded once. Then manage, but don't bleed on my floor. The humiliation wasn't in her tone. It was in the reality. Carter lifted the spoon awkwardly, hand unsteady. It shook slightly, and a drop fell back into the bowl. His face tightened, anger flashing at his own body. Emily didn't mock him. She simply turned away and wiped the counter. That quiet refusal to shame him felt worse than cruelty. It made him want to earn her respect instead of forcing it. When he struggled to lift the glass, Emily returned without drama. She steadied the cup with one hand, letting him drink without spilling. Carter felt the closeness, normal, practical, unromantic. And still it did something to him, something he didn't want to name. He swallowed, then whispered, "Thank you," as if the words were foreign. Emily didn't smile. "Don't thank me," she said. "Change." That single word sat between them like a verdict. After he ate, Emily handed him a folded piece of paper. Carter opened it and found rules written in neat handwriting. 1. You will speak to me with respect. 2. You will not use money to control this situation. 3. You will do what you can for yourself before you ask for help. 4. You will not lie to me. Carter stared at the list, stunned by its simplicity. Emily added, "If you can't agree, the door is right there." Carter's pride flared, immediate and hot. He was used to contracts drafted by lawyers, not boundaries written on cafe paper. "You're treating me like a child," he said, voice clipped. Emily met his eyes unshaken. "No," she replied. "I'm treating you like a man." Carter blinked, caught off guard by the distinction. "You've lived like rules don't apply to you," she continued. "They do." For a moment, Carter couldn't breathe, not from pain, but from recognition. He looked down at his injured arm, then back at her. He wanted to refuse, to stand up, to walk out and reclaim control. But the truth was brutal. He couldn't even put on his coat properly alone. And something deeper than injury held him there, a craving for someone who wasn't impressed by his name. Carter swallowed hard and nodded once. "Fine," he said. "I agree." Emily didn't celebrate. She simply moved as if the day continued. "Good," she said. "Now tell me what really happened." Carter's throat tightened. He had told the world a polished version, minor accident, quick recovery. He had protected his image like it was life itself. But Emily's eyes demanded something else, raw truth without branding. So Carter spoke quietly, and for the first time, without exaggeration. He told her about the intersection, the headlights, the violent swerve. He told her about waking up trapped, the smell of smoke and rain. He admitted the panic when his arm wouldn't lift, when pain owned him. He confessed the ambulance question and the silence that followed. "I realized I don't have anyone," he said, voice low, ashamed. Emily listened without pity, but her gaze softened by 1 degree. Not forgiveness, understanding. "You have people," Emily said carefully. "You just don't have intimacy." Carter's jaw tightened as if the word itself offended him. "I never needed it," he said. Emily leaned forward slightly, voice calm. "Everyone needs it. You just hid it." Carter looked away, anger rising again. Not at her, at himself. He hated being seen so clearly by someone he once dismissed. And yet part of him felt relieved to stop performing. As evening approached, Emily made another decision without asking permission. She called someone, her cousin, a practical man with a truck, about a spare room. Carter listened, tense, ready to reject charity. Emily noticed. "It's not charity," she said. "It's structure. You can't stay in the cafe," she added. "And you can't go back to that silence tonight." Carter's chest tightened at her certainty. No one in his world spoke to him like they knew better. When Carter stood to leave, the movement pulled pain through his shoulder. He winced, and Emily was there immediately, steadying him without ceremony. For a moment their eyes met, close, real, unprotected. Carter felt something sharp in his chest, like shame turning into gratitude. Emily released him quickly, keeping the boundary intact. "Tomorrow," she said, "you start learning how to live without buying people." Carter nodded, swallowing hard because he knew one thing now. If he wanted Emily in his life, he would have to become someone money couldn't imitate. The next morning, Carter woke in a room that wasn't designed to impress. A small guest room above Emily's cousin's house, clean and modest. The curtains were plain. The air smelled like laundry soap, not luxury. For a second, panic rose, his body searching for familiar power. Then pain reminded him he didn't have the energy for panic. His sling pulled at his neck, his shoulder ached with stubborn rhythm. And downstairs he heard laughter that didn't perform. Emily knocked once and stepped in without waiting for permission. "Good," she said, assessing him like a nurse would, practical, precise. Carter frowned. "You don't knock and wait," he muttered. Emily lifted an eyebrow. "You don't get to be dramatic," she replied. She set a small tray on the dresser. Water, pills, toast, fruit. Carter looked at the simple food like it was a lesson. Emily's voice stayed calm. "Take your meds. Then we work." "Work?" Carter repeated, irritated despite himself. Emily folded her arms. "Physical therapy doesn't start when it's convenient," she said. "I have a private therapist," Carter answered almost automatically. Emily nodded, unimpressed. "Great. Then you'll do the exercises anyway." She handed him a printed sheet, basic movements, careful steps. Carter stared at it, pride protesting the smallness of the task, but he lifted his left hand and started, jaw clenched. The humiliation was quiet, and that made it worse. His muscles shook. His breathing tightened. Sweat formed at his hairline. Emily watched, not cold, just unwilling to let him lie to himself. "Stop trying to win," she said softly. "Just recover." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Winning is how I survive," he replied. Emily's voice didn't change. "No. Winning is how you avoid feeling." The sentence landed like a truth he couldn't buy his way around. After the exercises, Emily drove him to the cafe in her old car. The interior smelled like vanilla air freshener and everyday life. Carter sat carefully, seatbelt awkward with his injury. He watched Emily's hands on the wheel. Steady, practiced, unbothered. No driver, no tinted windows, no privacy. And still, the ride felt safer than his penthouse had in weeks. That realization unsettled him more than the pain did. The cafe was quiet when they arrived. Emily set Carter at a small table near the window, away from attention. "You stay here," she said. "You observe. You don't manage anything." Carter looked up. "I don't know how to be useless," he admitted. Emily's mouth curved slightly, not a smile, almost pity. "Then you'll learn," she said, "because being human requires surrender." Carter inhaled slowly, hating how much he needed her calm to breathe. Around noon, the first crack in peace arrived. A black SUV pulled up outside, sleek, familiar, wrong for this street. Carter's assistant stepped out, phone in hand, panic in her eyes. Behind her, 2 security men scanned the cafe like it was a threat. Emily noticed through the window and went still. Carter's chest tightened. His world had found him, and his world never came gently. The assistant entered fast, ignoring the bell above the door. "Sir," she said, relief flooding her voice. "We've been calling everywhere." She moved toward him, already listing solutions like bullets. "We can relocate you to the rehab suite. The therapist is on standby. The press is asking questions. The board wants reassurance. Emily stepped between them, calm as stone. "Lower your voice," Emily said. "This is a cafe, not his conference room." The assistant blinked, offended by the interruption. "I'm here for Mr. Hale," she replied, tone sharpening. Emily didn't move. "He's here with me," she answered. Carter watched the exchange, feeling 2 instincts collide. Part of him wanted to rescue his assistant, restore hierarchy, smooth it over. Another part, the new, fragile part, wanted to protect this quiet space. And he realized the choice was his now. "Emily," Carter said carefully. "It's fine." Emily turned to him, eyes firm. "Is it?" she asked. Carter's throat tightened. He saw it then. The pattern. His world barged in, demanded, controlled, and he called it normal. Emily wasn't blocking the assistant out of pride. She was defending the first place where Carter had been treated like a person. Carter exhaled and sat up straighter. "It's not fine," he said. The assistant froze. "Sir?" Carter's voice stayed calm, but it carried authority in a new direction. "You're not bringing cameras here. You're not turning this into a statement." The assistant's eyes widened, confused. "We're trying to protect your image." Carter's jaw tightened. "My image isn't injured," he said. "My body is." Emily's gaze flickered. Approval quickly contained. And for the first time, Carter felt what real leadership tasted like. The assistant tried a different angle, softer. "There's also a visitor," she said carefully, glancing at her phone. Carter already knew who. The silver-dressed woman appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned by gossip. Perfect hair, perfect coat, perfect smile. She scanned the cafe and found Carter instantly, then found Emily and hardened. "Carter," she said sweetly, "this is where you've been hiding." Emily didn't step back. She didn't apologize for existing. She simply wiped the counter as if the woman were just another customer. The woman approached Carter, voice lowered, intimate for the audience she imagined. "I can take you home," she said. "You don't need to stay in this place." The insult was wrapped in perfume. Carter's face tightened, and he hated the old comfort it offered. Escape. Emily kept wiping the same spot, and somehow that steady motion held him. Carter swallowed and looked at Emily instead of the woman. It was a small choice, but it felt like an earthquake. The woman's smile faltered. "Carter?" she repeated, sharper. Carter's voice came out low. "I'm not going with you," he said. Her eyes widened, offended. "Excuse me? I'm recovering," Carter continued, "and I'm not doing this with cameras and optics." The assistant shifted nervously. The room held its breath. The silver-dressed woman laughed, brittle. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "This is temporary. You'll be yourself again." Carter's jaw clenched. "I am myself," he replied, and his own words surprised him. Then he added quieter, "And that's the problem." The woman stared, realizing she'd lost a version of him she preferred. Emily looked up for a second, then back down, letting the moment belong to him. It wasn't romance. It was reckoning. Outside, a car slowed. Someone with a phone raised, aiming for drama. The assistant tensed, stepping toward the window. Carter stood carefully, pain flashing across his face, and made a decision. He walked to the door and locked it from inside. Then he turned the sign to closed without asking anyone's permission. The bell above the door chimed softly, like a boundary being set. Emily stared at him, and for the first time her silence felt like respect. Carter faced the assistant and spoke with finality. "You will tell the board I'm stable. You will tell the press nothing. You will cancel all events for the next month," he added. The assistant's mouth opened, ready to argue, but Carter lifted his left hand. "This isn't negotiation," he said, and his voice didn't shake. Then, to the silver-dressed woman, he said, "You should leave." She stared, wounded pride turning into contempt. "You'll regret this," she hissed. When they finally left, the cafe felt quieter than before. Emily exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding breath for an hour. Carter sank into the chair, shoulder throbbing, but his eyes clearer. "You didn't have to do that," Emily said, voice softer than her rules. Carter looked at her, something raw in his gaze. "Yes," he replied. "I did. Because if he didn't choose truth now, he would lose it forever." And Carter realized the next test wouldn't be his world knocking again. The next test would be whether Emily believed his change was real. The cafe stayed closed the rest of the afternoon. Not because Emily was afraid of gossip, but because peace needed space. Carter sat at the small table, breathing carefully through the pain. His shoulder throbbed, but something deeper had shifted into place. For the first time, he had said no to optics, no to performance. He had chosen discomfort over image, and that choice felt both terrifying and clean. Emily didn't praise him. She didn't soften into gratitude. She made tea, wiped counters, moved through the room like normal mattered. That was her power. She refused to worship change. She waited to see if it stayed. Carter watched her and realized how addicted he was to applause. In his world, every good act came with a camera angle. Here, the only reward was quiet, and it made him nervous. "You're going to regret this," Carter said suddenly, voice low. Emily didn't look up. "Which part?" she asked calmly. "Cutting off the schedule. The events? The board will panic." Emily poured tea like his panic wasn't her job. "Then let them panic," she replied. "You can't heal while pretending." Carter swallowed. Pretending had been his whole religion. And now he was realizing it had cost him everything real. That night, Carter didn't return to his penthouse. Emily insisted, and Carter didn't fight her. He stayed in the small room above her cousin's house, listening to the home. Pipes creaked. Someone laughed downstairs at a sitcom. The simplicity should have annoyed him. Instead, it soothed him. He stared at the ceiling and admitted something he never had before. He was lonely, and he had earned it. In the morning, Carter asked for a notebook. Emily raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Carter's jaw tightened, like he hated the vulnerability of the request. "I need to make a list," he said, "of what I broke." Emily didn't smile, but she slid a notebook toward him anyway. "Good," she answered. "Start with your pride." Carter looked down, and for once he didn't argue. He wrote slowly with his left hand, letters imperfect. "I used money to erase people. I spoke like I was above others. I let my circle treat kindness like weakness. I called her simple like it was an insult." Each line felt like ripping a seam in his armor. Emily read nothing. She didn't hover. She let him face himself without an audience. Later, Carter asked to go somewhere with her. Emily hesitated. "Where?" Carter's eyes met hers, serious. "The hospital," he said. Emily's posture stiffened. "Why?" Carter swallowed. "Because someone got hurt because of me." Emily stared, searching for manipulation. But Carter's face held something unfamiliar. Responsibility without bargaining. They drove to the intersection where it happened. Carter asked Emily to stop the car so he could look at it. The light changed. Cars passed. Life moved as if nothing had almost ended. Carter's chest tightened as he remembered the shock, the helplessness. "I wasn't at fault," he said quietly. "But I was reckless." Emily kept her eyes on the road. "Reckless people still hurt others," she replied. Carter nodded once, accepting the truth without defense. At the hospital, Carter moved slowly through the corridor. His sling made him look smaller than his reputation. Nurses looked up, recognized him, then looked away politely. Carter asked for the name of the other driver involved in the accident. His assistant had said the man was fine. Minor injuries, nothing major. But nothing major was a phrase Carter no longer trusted. Emily watched him carefully, heart guarded, hope not invited. When they found the room, Carter stopped at the doorway. Inside, a middle-aged man sat in bed with a brace on his leg. A teenage daughter stood beside him, eyes tired, protective. The man looked up and stiffened, recognizing Carter immediately. The girl's face tightened with distrust. Carter's throat closed for a moment, pride begging him to leave. But he stepped in anyway, slow and respectful. "I'm Carter Hale," he said, voice low, controlled. The girl's eyes narrowed like she expected an excuse. "I know who you are," the man replied, wary. Carter swallowed. "I came to check on you," he said, "and to apologize for what you went through. Fear, pain, all of it." The girl scoffed softly. "Apologies don't pay hospital bills." Carter nodded. "You're right," he said. "That's not why I'm here." He placed a folder on the bedside table. Inside were documents, not flashy, not branded, no press release. Carter had arranged full coverage of the man's medical expenses, but he had also arranged something else, paid leave and job protection. The man's eyes widened as he read. The girl's expression faltered. Emily's chest tightened, because this wasn't theater. This was the kind of help that didn't need witnesses. "Why?" the man asked, voice rough. Carter's jaw tightened as he searched for words that weren't polished. "Because I've been living like consequences don't apply to me," he said. "And I realize that's not strength, it's entitlement." The girl stared at him, suspicious but quieter now. Carter added, "I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm just making sure you don't pay for a moment that scared you." When they left the room, Emily didn't speak right away. Carter's shoulder ached, but his eyes looked clearer than they had in months. He walked carefully, as if each step mattered more than his image. In the hallway, Emily finally asked, "When did you become this man?" Carter's throat tightened. "I'm not," he admitted. "Not yet." Emily's gaze sharpened. "Then don't perform it," she warned. "Become it." That afternoon, Carter made another call, one that cost him comfort. He ordered a full review of his company's workplace culture, not a PR audit, an internal investigation with real authority. He invited a third-party ethics team to report directly to the board. His assistant protested. "This could expose issues," she warned. Carter's answer was calm. "Good," he said. "Let them be exposed." Emily listened and felt something shift. Fear, maybe, turning into cautious respect. But Emily didn't let respect become romance. That evening, as Carter sat in the cafe after closing, she sat across from him. "You did good today," she said, and Carter's heart jumped at the small credit. Then she added, "But good isn't the same as safe." Carter's breath caught. "I'm trying," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "Trying is the beginning," she replied, "not the proof." Carter stared at her, realizing she was about to draw the hardest line yet. "If you want me in your life," Emily said, voice steady, "you earn it slowly. No big gestures, no gifts, no saving me. You show up in small ways until I believe you can stay." Carter's jaw tightened, pain and pride mixing. "How long?" he asked. Emily's eyes didn't soften. "As long as it takes," she said. Carter exhaled, feeling the weight of what he was asking of her. And for the first time, he didn't look for a shortcut. Carter nodded once, slow and final. "Then I'll do it," he said, voice low. No applause. Emily watched him, searching for the old arrogance behind his eyes. What she found instead was exhaustion and determination. Not the determination of conquest, but of surrender. Still, she didn't smile, because she knew this wasn't the ending. This was the last test before the ending. Whether Carter could love her without control, and whether she could let him try. Weeks passed, and Carter didn't disappear. Not after the hospital visit. Not after the uncomfortable company review. Not after the first time the board pushed back and called him emotional. He stayed quietly, consistently, like a man learning a new language. Emily watched him with guarded eyes, refusing to be fooled by momentum. Because the hardest part of love wasn't the beginning. It was believing the good would still be there tomorrow. Carter returned to physical therapy with discipline, but no show. He did the boring exercises without complaining, without trying to dominate them. When pain flared, he breathed through it instead of barking orders. Emily didn't coddle him. She simply said, "Again," and he obeyed. He learned how to open doors with one hand, how to button shirts slowly. He learned that weakness wasn't shameful when it was honest. And for the first time, he stopped seeing help as humiliation. He also learned Emily's life, not as a backdrop, but as truth. He showed up early to unlock the cafe, careful with keys in his left hand. He washed dishes badly at first, then better, then almost well. He listened to regular customers and remembered their names. He carried boxes with his good arm and apologized when he dropped something. Emily watched, silent, because she didn't trust speeches. But she couldn't ignore consistency. Carter's world kept trying to reclaim him. Emails arrived marked urgent, invitations sent with assumptions. The silver dress woman made one more appearance, this time with rumors. Carter didn't debate. He didn't explain. He simply ended the arrangement with clarity and no cruelty. "I'm choosing a different life," he said, and didn't soften it for comfort. Emily heard about it later and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. One afternoon, the ethics team released preliminary findings. Not catastrophic, but ugly enough to bruise Carter's pride. Managers who bullied staff. HR complaints buried for convenience. Carter sat at Emily's small table, reading the report with quiet fury. Not fury at exposure, fury at himself for allowing it. Emily placed coffee beside him and said, "This is your chance." Carter looked up. "To fix it," he answered. For real. Carter called an emergency leadership meeting. Not in a tower with cameras, but in a plain conference room with no applause. He listened to employees who had never been allowed to speak. He apologized without excuses, then offered concrete protections and policies. He created an anonymous reporting system with independent oversight. And when a senior executive threatened to resign and take investors, Carter said, "Then go. I'd rather lose money than keep abuse." The headlines came anyway because headlines always came. Some praised him as a visionary. Others mocked him as weak. Carter read none of it. He kept showing up at the cafe. Emily expected him to crack under public pressure, but he didn't. He tightened his routine, held his boundaries, stayed quiet, and she realized something frightening. This change wasn't fragile anymore. It was becoming him. One evening, after closing, Emily found Carter sweeping the floor. His arm had improved. He moved more freely now, less guarded. He looked up with a small, genuine smile. No charm, no performance. "You missed a spot," Emily said, testing him. Carter nodded. "Tell me where," he replied, calm. Emily felt the familiar ache of old wounds, but it was softer now. Because he wasn't fighting her boundaries. He was living inside them. That night, Emily finally asked the question she'd avoided. "Why me?" she said, voice quiet, almost bitter with history. Carter's face tightened. He put the broom down carefully. He didn't answer fast. He didn't romanticize. He simply sat across from her like he had nowhere else to be. "Because you were the first person who didn't need my name," he said, "and you were brave enough to tell me the truth." Emily's throat tightened, but she didn't let tears win too easily. "That sounds like you needed a lesson," she said, protective. Carter nodded once. "I did," he admitted, then softer. "But you're not my lesson, Emily." He swallowed. "You're my choice." Emily looked away, fighting the tremble in her chest. She had been someone's mistake once. She refused to be that again. Carter leaned forward slightly, careful not to invade her space. "I'm not asking you to erase what I did," he said. "I'm asking for permission to spend my life making it right." Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. "How do I know you won't get bored when you're fully healed?" she asked. The fear was raw, and it deserved respect. Carter's eyes didn't flinch. "Because I'm not chasing comfort anymore," he replied. The next day, Emily got a letter. Handwritten, no logo, no grandeur. It wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. Carter described the moment in the ambulance when he couldn't name anyone. He wrote about how humiliating it felt to have everything and still be alone. He wrote, "You made me realize wealth without love is just isolation." Then he ended with one sentence that hit Emily like a quiet miracle. "I don't want to own you. I want to deserve you." Emily didn't respond immediately. She let time do its honest work. She watched him show up on hard days, not just easy ones. She watched him sit in silence without demanding her comfort. She watched him apologize when he snapped from pain, then correct himself. She watched him help her cousin fix a broken sink without calling someone else. Small acts, no witnesses, no reward, just presence. And little by little, her fear began to loosen its grip. On a snowy evening, Emily closed the cafe and found Carter waiting outside. Not with flowers, not with a ring, not with a crowd. Just him, in a warm coat, hands tucked in his pockets, breath visible. "I wanted to show you something," he said quietly. Emily hesitated, then nodded, choosing courage in small doses. He led her down the street to a building she recognized. Old, neglected, closed. The community center. "I bought it," Carter said, watching her carefully. Emily's heart tightened instantly. "Carter." He lifted his hand gently. "Not for control," he said. "Listen." He handed her a folder, and inside were permits, plans, and a community board roster. Her name wasn't on a plaque. Her face wasn't on a banner. But the mission statement made her breath catch. A center for job training and support, built for people like Emily, people the world called simple and forgot. "Why would you do this?" Emily whispered. Carter's eyes held hers steadily. "Because you taught me what matters," he answered. "Not applause, not reputation, Not comfort. People. He gestured to the papers. I'm funding it. The community is running it. Emily's chest tightened as tears rose. Hot, unwanted, real. And I wanted you to see, Carter added, that I'm building a life you can trust. Emily stepped closer, trembling, and Carter didn't move. He let her choose the distance, let her choose the pace. When she finally reached for his hand, his breath caught like a prayer. She held it gently, and Carter looked at their hands like they were sacred. I can't promise I won't be afraid, Emily said, voice breaking. Carter nodded. Then I'll stay while you're afraid, he replied. Emily swallowed hard, then said the words she never thought she'd say to him. I choose you. Carter didn't celebrate like a conqueror. He exhaled like a man rescued. He leaned his forehead to hers, careful, reverent, almost stunned. I'm sorry, he whispered, for calling your life small. Emily closed her eyes. It was never small, she answered. It was honest. Snow fell softly around them, quiet as forgiveness. Carter kissed her then, not like a man claiming, but like a man grateful. And for the first time, Emily didn't feel too simple for his world. She felt like the reason his world finally became real. Emily didn't fall in love with Carter's recovery. She fell in love with his consistency, with the way he stayed when no one was watching, with the way he stopped using money as a shield and started using it as responsibility, with the way his pride learned to bow, quietly, daily, without applause. And Carter didn't love Emily because she was simple. He loved her because she was real, because she had the kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind that sets boundaries and still leaves room for redemption, the kind that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't bargain, just stands. In the months that followed, Carter's arm healed. But the deeper healing happened somewhere else. In boardrooms where he chose integrity over comfort, in small mornings where he brewed coffee with one hand and gratitude with the other, in a community center built not to polish his name, but to protect other people's dignity. Emily kept her cafe, not as a backdrop to his change, but as the heart of their new life. Some evenings, Carter would sit at the corner table, sleeves rolled up, listening to Emily's stories, to customers' worries, to the quiet rhythm of ordinary people. And he would look at her like the miracle was never the money. The miracle was that she let him learn, and that he actually did. Because the truth is, life didn't make Carter poor. It made him honest. It didn't take away his fortune. It took away his illusion that wealth was the highest form of security. And once that illusion broke, he finally understood the right order of things. Power without love is empty. Success without humility is fragile, and a heart that refuses to change will always end up alone. But a man who learns to choose presence over pride can rebuild everything that truly matters. And Emily? She was never too simple for his world. His world was just too shallow to deserve her, until he became deeper. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been made to feel too simple to be chosen, comment, I choose real love. And don't forget to subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more stories of second chances, healing, and love that proves itself with actions, not promises.